Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning and to return again to the University of Central Florida. I want to especially thank John for his leadership of the Office of Global Perspectives and to commend the university as well as the National Conference of Editorial Writers for focusing its programming this year on the critical relationship between climate, energy, and national security. Your vision and your commitment to a balanced discussion of these and other issues is tremendously important to our democracy. Simply put, there is no more important issue on our national agenda right now, and so I'm honored to be with you today to have a chance to discuss it. As John said, I spent 35 years in uniform serving our nation around the world in the United States Navy. I entered the Navy during the Vietnam War and retired after the Berlin Wall fell. In Somalia, I commanded the ships of 6 nations in the largest amphibious evacuation under fire since the Korean War. I've weathered enormous storms at sea, overseeing many billions of dollars of the Navy budget, and I've seen threats materialize from crowds that, the moment before, looked like peaceful civilians. Yet of all the threats I've witnessed throughout my career, I have never seen a threat that is as complex or for which we are as little prepared as the one that I'm here to talk with you about today. It's the threat I believe is still vastly misunderstood and underappreciated, but a threat to which we must respond. The threat is climate change. I know that there remain some who are not convinced by the science of climate change. I'm convinced. Many still do not believe that humans are contributing in important ways to the warming of the globe. I believe that human activity is a profoundly important factor. But leaving aside that debate for the moment, permit me to offer this observation. Threats and risks should never be allowed to grow to the point where they present themselves with 100% certainty. By the time they achieve that level, as General Gordon Sullivan, the former Army Chief of Staff, has said, something bad will have happened on the battlefield. Ladies and gentlemen, something bad is happening already in our climate. I see our struggle to understand and tame our environment as the battle of the age. As we as a nation can debate how quickly this threat will manifest itself, but I believe I can guarantee this. The risks to America's security, great as they are, will continue to grow if we don't act with urgency. Our country is beginning to engage in a public debate about what to do about climate change. This debate will have lasting impacts on the environment, on our economy, on other aspects of our security, and on the future we leave to our children and grandchildren. To be clear, addressing climate change is not simply about saving polar bears or preserving the beauty of mountain vistas. Climate change is a threat to our national security. It is a matter of preserving our way of life. I'm here today in 2 capacities, as John mentioned, and then there are a couple of others that he also alluded to. But today I'm here as 2 people for you. First, as the president of the American Security Project, the bipartisan organization John referred to that more than 2 years ago identified climate change as one of 4 principal national security challenges in the 21st century. The others, terrorism, energy dependence, and nuclear proliferation, are each related to climate change in their own way. You can learn more about ASP's work on this issue at www.secureamericanfuture.org. But the American Security Project is not the only group of national security thinkers and operators outside of the University of Central Florida concerned with the threat posed by climate change. Since retiring from the Navy, I've served as the president, as John said, of the Institute for Public Research at CNA. CNA is a not-for-profit scientific analysis and solutions institution heavily involved in helping government leaders at all levels understand and deal with complex operational and public policy issues. In 2006 and 2007, CNA organized a military advisory board composed of retired generals and admirals who, after a year-long study, concluded unanimously that climate change poses a serious threat to America's national security. In their report, National Security and the Threat of Climate Change, they saw changes in the Earth's climate as a, quote, threat multiplier. for instability in some of the most volatile regions in the world. They judged that changes in our environment would even threaten regions whose stability we now take for granted. It's one thing for retired military officers to see the link. The good news is that both the administrations of George W. Bush and Barack Obama could get it too. The agencies of government responsible for our security have picked up the challenge on this issue. In 2008, the final National Defense Strategy issued by the Bush administration recognized that climate change would be among key shapers of U.S. defense policy in the years ahead. The National Intelligence Council, the intelligence community's think tank, has concluded that, quote, global climate change will have wide-ranging implications for U.S. national security interests over the next 20 years, unquote. From the new organization called the Center for Climate Change and National Security at the CIA to the U.S. Navy's Task Force Climate Change, concern over global warming is not limited to environmentalists anymore. The national security community, officials in both Republican and Democratic administrations, and others who see the linkage between our security and environment are rightly worried about climate change because of the magnitude of its expected impact around the globe. The United States will be far from immune. It's easy to get lost in abstractions when we talk about climate change and national security. The path from climate change to human impacts to security issues is not always clear or direct, but it is real. Let me talk about three specifics from a defense perspective, from my area of expertise. First, why our military and other instruments of national security will be called on in new ways in the new world. Second, how and where those national security instruments will operate and how they must adapt. And third, what will become of our relations with allies, friends, and competitors in this new climate world? First, climate change will force changes in the why. The United States fights, gives aid, supports government, provides direct assistance, and anticipates natural and man-made disasters. More than ever, the whole of government must be called on to join the team. Consider that our security is tethered to this. The ice sheets in the Himalayas and on the Tibetan Plateau provide fresh water to more than 1 billion residents of China, India, Pakistan, and Southeast Asia. Climate scientists predict that those glaciers will disappear due to the planet's warming by the middle of this century, threatening the economies and lifeblood of South and Southeast Asia. The 5 major rivers serving China, Southeast Asia, and South Asia would become seasonal flows. This is a region that has seen multiple conflicts in the last 50 years, where India and Pakistan now both rely on nuclear weapons for their own security. It's the home to Al-Qaeda. According to the World Health Organization, quote, water scarcity affects 1 in 3 people on every continent of the globe, unquote. Again, the WHO says, quote, almost 1/5 of the world's population live in areas where the water is physically scarce. 1/4 of the global population also live in developing countries that face water shortages due to the lack of infrastructure to fetch water from rivers and aquifers, unquote. I worry that scarcity of food and water resulting from droughts and decreased rainfall will bring out the worst in people and governments, not just in South Asia, but around the world. New climate conditions will lead to increased conflict and mass human migrations. Economic refugees who cross our own borders in substantial numbers from the South today may swell to a tide of desperate climate refugees struggling to survive. The stress of changes in the environment, from disruptions in agriculture to the spread of tropical diseases like malaria, will weaken already marginal states. Failing states will incubate extremism. We see evidence now of terrorist violence increasing most where climate change is already being felt most deeply, particularly in areas of the globe affected by the loss of farmland and desertification. United States military planners can anticipate in these new times having to deploy our forces more often to more places to protect and further America's interests, providing relief, imposing order, and even fighting wars. America's men and women in uniform will be called on increasingly for direct engagement, as well as to support the operations of legitimate governments and non-governmental organizations alike. The second factor, climate will force changes in how we operate our forces around the world. Sea level rise threatens large investments in U.S. facilities everywhere. Desertification and shifts in the availability of water can change logistics patterns directly for all of our forces, and melting permafrost poses special challenges for mobility and maneuvering of ground forces. The British Indian Ocean Territory of Diego Garcia is a critical staging facility for U.S. and British operations, naval and air force operations in the Middle East and Central Asia. The island sits just a few feet above sea level at its highest point. Rising sea levels may threaten operations at Diego Garcia and deny the United States this critical operating hub for its armed forces, therefore reducing our flexibility. This is just one example. There are myriad others. New coastline, new terrain, new territorial claims will confuse what we consider the battle space. Our national security team must prepare. These challenges are not insurmountable, but meeting them will be costly. We have to consider our options carefully to avoid reducing readiness. For example, confronting changes in the military's operating environment and mission set may lead to somewhat different decisions about the shape and balance of U.S. forces. Consider it takes 20 or more years to build a new aircraft for the U.S. Air Force or Navy, and that Navy ships are designed to last 30 to 50 years. With these extended time frames, choices we make now will set us on a course that it'll be tough to change quickly. We must garrison our forces where they're secure from an encroaching environment, yet position them to strike our enemies and help our friends, as importantly. We must plan for new demands and anticipate new and revised missions for our military forces and factor those into our calculations about America's national security. In the meantime, no one should underestimate the flexibility of America's armed forces now. One example from recent history is the homeward transit of the Pacific Fleet Amphibious Force commanded by my friend Admiral Steve Clary after Operation Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. Following the war, this large formation of ships and aircraft with the Marine Expeditionary Brigade embarked, about 5,000 Marines, was eastbound crossing the Indian Ocean. The ships were slowed before reaching Cape Comorin, the southern tip of India, by the approach of a typhoon from the east. As often happens, that typhoon curved north into the Bay of Bengal and came ashore over Bangladesh with devastating effect. The Admiral turned the formation north and followed the typhoon into the bay to provide humanitarian assistance. If you think about it, the equipment and training American taxpayers have bought for Marines and sailors for war serve them really well when their help is needed too. The amphibious ships brought talented, skilled young men and women, trucks, landing craft, helicopters, tracked vehicles, water purification units, combat rations for distributions, medical support, communications, and access to overhead imagery for situational awareness. I can tell you, as a former amphibious commander, the list goes on. By the way, the Defense Department didn't name the relief operation in Bangladesh, the Bengalis did. They referred to the Marines and sailors who came ashore as angels from the sea. That became Operation Sea Angel. Another example of adaptation, in 2008 and 2009, CNA chartered a second military advisory board. This group of 12 retired admirals and generals published a report in May of this year entitled Powering America's Defense: Energy and the Risks to National Security. From battlefield to marketplace, these defense experts concluded that our dependence on oil weakens our international position, undermines our economic stability, and risks the lives of troops. Further, they decided that continuing reliance on fossil fuels will be an ever greater risk as supplies fall short of demand Regulation and costs increase, and fragile regions of the world are destabilized further by climate change. Very much on the plus side, the members recognize that the buying power of the Pentagon, guided by the right specifications, could contribute in powerful ways to encouraging American innovation in alternative energies. I'll say more about that later. We've talked a bit about why and how our national security forces will likely change. Finally, about alliances. The Arctic is a prime example of how alliances forged in more stable times may be strained and forced to adapt to the realities of climate change. Just a few years ago, as you know, the scientific community was predicting that the Arctic wouldn't be ice-free until the middle of this century. Now they project that to be 2013, just 4 years from now. In the Arctic, the loss of sea ice has caused concern for the U.S. Navy for more than a decade. What naval planners know is that the loss of sea ice at the North Pole has the potential to create commercial and military activity by other powers. As if we needed any evidence of this, look no further than the 2007 expedition by Russia to plant its flag on the seabed at the North Pole. Not surprisingly, Canada, Norway, Denmark, and the United States, all nations bordering on the Arctic, responded critically to Russia's actions. And the 4 protesting nations, traditional allies, may find their relationship strained by new Arctic challenges and opportunities too. New climate conditions, geographic realities, changes in economic and commercial circumstances, and the pressures of migrating populations all will test old alliances and perhaps occasionally inspire new ones. Addressing climate change in a national security context sounds expensive, doesn't it? It will be. And there are some who believe that it would be better to save our money now so that we can better adapt to the worst of climate change when it really begins to be felt later this century. Unfortunately, shoving the climate change off on our kids and grandkids makes no more sense to me than saddling them with the monstrous debt we have already decided to leave them. According to one study done at the London School of Economics, responding to climate change after its worst impacts are felt could cost up to 20% of gross global product each year. By 2050, the International Organization for Migration projects there will be 200 million climate refugees, millions of them destined for the United States as populations move from south to north across the globe. If we think we have an immigration challenge now in this country, we haven't seen anything yet. Mass migration is not unprecedented in the history of our species. It has happened before in the face of changing climates. But it is unprecedented since the advent of permanent borders and the rise of the nation state. It is unprecedented in a world populated by more than 6 billion souls. Our children and grandchildren will be forced to call on their military to respond to humanitarian crises, as it always has, when famine or war or extremism and terrorism emerge from desperate human waves. The bottom line, climate change is going to cost us. It should cost us and not future generations. It should cost people, the people who get to make choices now, like me. It should cost us. We should impose this burden on ourselves and not on future generations. As a people, we will either pay a relatively modest amount now to forestall its worst impacts, or we will pay more later, a lot more later, in both treasure and human life. But there's opportunity here too. America may be able to lead the world to a new place. Let's look at that. Our nation's economic might is the backbone of all of our nation's power. It is the fundamental building block of national security. If we respond to the new climate change aggressively, if we take on the challenge expecting to bring about an energy and climate revolution, we can change the world. We can bolster our security, improve living conditions everywhere, increase stability, and assure or regain America's place of economic leadership. I believe that by responding to the climate challenge while reducing our energy dependence, we can transform our economy, create good-paying jobs, and lead the world toward a cleaner, more sustainable future. All of this counts in the national security equation. But the economy will be strong only if we're leading in the development of clean technologies. Why? Because with the Earth's population heading toward 9 billion people in 2050, the demand for energy will drive the price of fossil fuel ever higher. The Chinese seem to understand this and have announced their intention to become the world leader in electric cars. The European companies already lead the world in the development of alternative energy. It boils down to this: green really is green. Responding to climate change is not just something we need for our security, but for our economic health, welfare, and prosperity also. From the telegraph to the telephone to the iPhone, from the automobile to the airplane to the surface of the moon, the United States has led the world in technological innovation for most of the last 2 centuries. We are sustained by our faith in the productive capacities of a free society. The result has been more than riches for the few. The result has been an era of unprecedented global economic growth, communication, and progress. As Americans, we can and we must harness our ingenuity and our industry once again to tackle the challenges posed by climate change. And we can. Our universities, like the University of Central Florida, are the best in the world. Our economy is the largest and our workers are among the most productive. We are uniquely innovative. Give American businesses clear and consistent signals by aligning our incentives with the mission, and we will see an avalanche of innovation and the birth of a new energy economy. The new economy is one where we produce more and more of our energy at home with wind farms on land and offshore, and with solar farms in the Southwest. It is an economy where our skilled industrial workforce in the Rust Belt is put back to work building wind turbines, solar panels, and a new generation of electric and hydrogen cars. It's an economy where new homes are built to be energy efficient and older homes are retrofitted to conserve energy. The new economy is one where we combine doing well with doing good by being effective stewards of the planet and leaders on the international scene. This is the economy that we need to bolster our national security. It is the economic leadership the world needs from the United States. We stand at a unique moment. I think we all understand the costs and risks of doing nothing. Most of us can see the opportunities glimmering in the not too distant future. The only issue is whether, like our ancestors setting out for the frontier, we have the courage. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change poses a clear and present danger. But if we respond appropriately, I believe we will enhance our security, not simply by averting the worst climate disasters, but by spurring a new energy revolution that produces jobs and opportunity right here. The imperative then is for leadership and for action on a global scale. The United States cannot and will not solve this problem alone. The stakes, the causes, and the consequences are truly global. We need China, India, Russia, Brazil, indeed every country around the world to join us in this effort. We all need to reduce our carbon emissions, stop deforestation, adopt clean energy, and secure our future. America was indispensable as the world confronted and overcame the 3 great challenges of the 20th century, the First and Second World War, and the Cold War. America is indispensable now as we face the greatest challenge of the 21st century. Are we up to it? Of course we are. That's what this is about. If you read the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, it notes that in our pursuit of a more perfect union, in providing for the common defense, in promoting the well-being of all, and in securing our liberty, we act not just for ourselves, but for our posterity, for our children and our grandchildren, and generations of Americans yet to be born. Thank you very much.